Warm and enthusiastic welcome. This is exactly how we'd like to celebrate literature. So keep that in mind whenever you see authors coming on stage. Bring this enthusiasm. Don't pretend to be over-intellectual. Share your joy. All right, today we have, yes, as mentioned already, amazing authors. I am very honored, and whenever you have great writers next to you sharing one panel like this, you always feel like, wow, I've made it this far to sit here with you. It will be just a matter of time where I'll be writing smart, great things as well. So today we have this panel, Extreme Metaphors, Challenging the Received Traditions. And here at the 24th International Literature Festival Berlin, we have obviously Helen making such a masterpiece of a curation. Thank you for that. And let's say all writing in that sense is metaphoric, and human conditions are illustrated by telling stories. And when we look at the world of literature, we navigate through what we call tradition or what we call genre, styles of narration, and we're finding always a way to describe or categorize writing. So we have standard realist fiction, and on the other side we have Africanfuturism. We have terms like magic realism, sci-fi, and that is what happens when you are from a realist tradition. You have now 3 award-winning authors next to me. So I quickly like to introduce themselves. So starting with Okwiri Oduor. She's the author of Things They Lost. As Helen mentioned, she already had a wonderful book talk yesterday. And her novel is about a mother-daughter relationship, about processing intergenerational trauma told from a perspective of a 12-year-old, Ayosa, in Kenya, who has the ability to see into her mother's past. And then we have next to her Novuyo, Rosa Tshuma, author of Digging Stars. She also had her book talk on Wednesday, and her novel is about science, astronomy, identity, and grief, taught or explained through an 11-year-old who follows in the footsteps of her astronomer father's revolutionary work in Bantu geometries and indigenous astronomies. And then we have Nnedi Okorafor, author of many books, but one of the books, her latest, Who She Knows, is a story about challenging cultural norms, inequalities, through the lens of a 13-year-old who had the call. That usually this call, only men and boys experience them annually to go to the salt roads. So, welcome. First of all, how are you feeling? Not all at once, please.
Feels great. It's an honor to share the stage with Nnedi, of course, and Okwiri, who's a great friend. And I were together. We've read each other's work, and it's just an honor to reconnect in this manner. Thank you to the festival, to Helen for having us, and for this very delicious panel. The topic is really interesting. The microphone.
Yeah.
Apologies.
Okay, there we go. Hello, everyone. I'm feeling great. I just got here yesterday from Phoenix, Arizona, so a bit jet lagged, but I'm really happy to be here.
Hi, everyone. I am very happy to be here as well, and contrary to what most people complain about the weather, I love the weather. It's great out there. Yeah.
See, I like the spirit. They always surprise us. So when we hear the term extreme metaphors, challenging received traditions, and also with the respect of all the isms that we like to use in the literature world to describe writings, how do you feel about it? Do you feel in some ways that what you write is described or can be described as extreme metaphors, or what does the title do with you? Maybe you can share a bit about this.
I think that challenge the part of the title of this panel that I really kind of vibe with is challenging traditions. And I think that, like, when I first started, it wasn't that was the reason why I was writing. It wasn't, specifically trying. I wasn't I wasn't writing and telling stories in response to something, but my work definitely challenges traditions. It is, and for me, I write science fiction and fantasy and whatever you want to call it. And I'm definitely, when I look at the traditions of those categories, what I'm writing definitely challenges those traditions by definition. I mean, if you look at, for example, classic science fiction, and the standpoint of classic science fiction, which tended to be very kind of cold, white, and male, and I'm writing these narratives that kind of center female, African female characters, and then this idea of it's very much the opposite of the idea of colonialism, where if we think about when aliens come to the world, and the way we respond to those aliens is with this colonialist attitude, whether they're either coming here to take stuff from us or we're afraid of them because they're others, all of that. The stories that I'm writing are not from that point of view, so they're just by definition challenging traditions, but it's not necessarily that that's why I'm writing. It's almost like by existing, I'm challenging those traditions. Thank you.
Who wants to go next?
Okay, so thank you, Nnedi. That's interesting. I feel like the way my work challenges the received traditions, I've been trying to understand where it fits in. Like, is it magic realism? Is it? But for me, what magic realism is a received tradition from, I would say, Latin America. That's just by definition, the Garcia Marquez, the Isabella Allendis, and but I'm more drawn to the Ben Okris, the Amos Tutuolas. That's where I feel like my literary home gravitates. And then another way that magic realism, apart from the geographic, of course, like to me, it's not a received tradition. It just feels like the core structure, the genealogy of it is undoubtedly, irrevocably African, So the stories that I write are inspired by maybe the myths, the songs, the epics that the received oral traditions. There's a long and very rich history of literature within the continent itself before the coming of the Europeans, the pre-colonial times, the colonial times, and of course the post-colonial times, and all of this figures within the writing. Its home is very irrevocably right here in Africa. That's why magic realism does not feel very native to me. It feels like it goes beyond that, and the stories that I'm talking about, for example, they were so seamlessly embedded in the everyday, things like, I don't know, in the marketplace, the man is suddenly missing his penis and he's panicking, or, night runners, or people who manipulate lightning, or, people who, the stories of, having spirits or the living dead, having them work for you, continue to live beyond death, and death is understood to be part of life, but also going beyond life, and death is not the end, and it's also a very natural and seamless fact of life, and these are things that I also like inspire me in my writing. So for me, the magic realism does not feel very natural as a category. It's a received category in this way, and I'm always searching for something. Is it magic realism or is it its own thing?
Yeah, I mean, I loved this topic and panel because I actually encountered problems in terms of categorizing after the book was published. And I'm really interested in this difference between geographical community and imagined community, right? And for me as a writer who's in the US, but who's also really cosmopolitan in taste, my imagined literary community transcends geography, and that was a really big problem with this book. Even in this novel, this book about science, and by science, Western science, indigenous science, there's the history of Haiti, the history of the Taino, the indigenous communities in Haiti, the history of the indigenous Americas, the Choctaw, there's the history of the Bantu, right? There's the knowledges, but also the geographies. So it's really sort of fused. And for me, it just has to do with, I think, for me, the cosmopolitan nature of who we are today. So, when I wrote this work, it came from a love for science and love for astronomy, a journey which led me into indigenous astronomy. So I always start with a question, as with House of Stone. And both my books have been accused of House of Stone more generously being multi-genre. Cool. But I do a bottom-up, not top-down approach, right? So when this book was published, I imagined it as a philosophical novel about science and scientists. So I was shocked when it came out. I shouldn't have been, but I am a bit of a naive sort of author in my own head. When there seemed to be confusion as to what it is, right? There was this label of science fiction, which made some readers rightly upset because this is not science fiction. You hear science fiction, you hear tropes. It was also called Africanfuturism. Before the reading, I think this had to do with astronomy and then the name, right? It's an African writer. And then, of course, then the readers are annoyed because this is not really African future. I'm reading this like, and so I'm really frustrated actually by labels.
Yes.
For me, my best readers have been those who just take the book and just read it and go with it. They will get what's in it. What I didn't know that what labels can do, they can put a box in a reader's mind. So they're looking for these things. And when they don't find them, there's this interesting idea that there's been a broken contract. There's also the fallacy of the fact that because one is writing in English, then these little neat boxes that were created in the Western canon fit. The moment you have this idea of science, and already the idea of indigenous science seems contentious, though the indigenous scientists in North America and Canada are really working that now. So already you have these knowledges that are cast as mythology in side-by-side Western science, which is the rational science. Yet all of these knowledge systems all have science and all have mythologies, right? So for me already it's like I was trying to put things that may not fit together and have them fit and try and build something new. So that's been my greatest frustration, just angry, upset readers. I'm an angry, upset author. It seems like identity, being a woman, being from Africa, being black, supersedes what's actually in the book. It's a weird thing for me. It's as though the reader cannot see what's in the book because we're so used to, if I see this, this is what I must get. Yes.
Thank you so much for the brilliant input that you made, and also for, it's, I think, important also for an audience to understand the kind of challenges, because at the end of the day, we see these books, we see the beautiful colors, and yet to the cover, to the beauty to a book, there comes much more, and that is always what I was wondering, the spectrum between where's my writing located, where is it perceived, how is it perceived, and where do I actively place my writing in that sense. So I feel like there is a constant battle also between what you experience, which is in a way new. One does not expect this necessarily when they write something in that sense. And then also we had in the panel before what is international. that you live in different places, you were born in different places, you are very cosmopolitan, but yet your writing is narrowed down to one, maybe a geographical location or by the looks. But having said so, maybe let's have a sample of each one of your books so that we can have a feel and taste. And I encourage you and invite you to look beside all the labels, all the isms, just listen to it and see what it kind of evokes without any labels. Try it. I know it's hard. So please, Okwiri.
Yes. In my book, there's a poet who her poetry is read at the radio station, broadcasts the poetry every single day, and it's one way the town is able to contend with the violent or traumatic past. It's a way this poetry is a sort of life force, and so this section contains one of these poems and a small reaction from the protagonist. So, my mother's child is a stranger whose neck I used to kiss back when we were a pair of black cats prowling in our mother's night terrors, causing her to shriek in her sleep, causing her to bend shirt hangers, trying to fish us out. We came twisted around each other like tapeworms. And my mother used that same shirt hanger to pick us apart, all the while wondering why bad luck only doubled when you prayed it away. Teeth black with old blood, eyes yellow with a blirbing of rage. At our christening, we received my mother's old Shirley Temple dolls. We mutilated them with scalpels, filled their mouths with feces, and my mother wept. She wondered, what did she do to deserve no ordinary daughters? And why couldn't we just be the type of darlings to sit on the mantelpiece so guests could pet us when they came around for crumpets? I don't like this poem, Biu stated emphatically. You have bad taste then. Biu laughed. Well, what do you expect? I live with pigeons. Biu looked smug and exceedingly pleased with herself, as though her bad taste was something she had nurtured carefully for years. Ayosa said, you don't get it. Miss Temperance, her words ache. Sometimes I feel as though she's writing a story that I know very well, like she's writing it for me. For you, Ayosa Ataraxis Brown? Yes, for me. Everyone probably thinks she's writing for them. That's why they threw the Molotov cocktail that one time. Ayosa looked out the window. I wonder what she's like. Prim, very prim. Ayosa's eyes widened. You know her? Oh, I know all sorts of people, Biu shrugged, and added, Miss Temperance eats an entire grapefruit every morning. She writes with her left hand. She makes celery soup for lunch every day. And she records all her poems standing by the kitchen sink and then sends the cassette tape by post to the radio station. Ayosa marveled at all these facts. She thought, this girl, Biu, she truly is my dear. Her toes curled. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to read from a section. This is part 2 of the novel. So here, Atando is 24. It's like 2018. She's in the USA, and she's in this astronomy program. This program is special in the sense that it has, I think, the sort of work you actually don't see yet now, where you have students from different places, like from indigenous nations, coming to study indigenous science, right? In the sense, it's indigenous science, but when we say indigenous, it means they're using modern instruments, telescopes and microscopes, but bringing that indigenous science into practice. So where I'm going to read, there are 3 friends. There's Peralta, who's Haitian American. He's a software engineer. Then we have Shaniqua, who's Afro-Chactile, and she's a biophysicist. Then we have Atandwa, who's a budding astrophysicist, and she's come all the way from Zimbabwe. We recited the star law my father had taught us, so this is Atandwa and Puralte. We both knew the story of the digging stars, known by the Khoisan as the daughters of the sky god. When their husband, that bloodshot male wildebeest star Aldebaran, which we glimpsed shimmering south of the daughters, went hunting and shot his arrow at the three zebras, the hazy blob of stars the Greeks call Orion's sword. His arrow fell short. He was afraid to retrieve his arrow thanks to the lioness, that fiery female wildebeest star Betelgeuse, sitting watch over the zebras. And so, there hovers the male wildebeest star in the night sky still, unable to move forward or go back. This is why he's a bright, angry red star. He's bloodshot with fatigue. You know, I never got why Aldebaran and Betelgeuse were called wildebeest stars, I told Puralte, not until one of Mama's lovers took us on a safari in Mosiwatunya. I can't do American accents, but the other characters have American accents. Your moms had lovers? Well, yeah, when she was Catholic and only went to church every other Sunday, then she joined the Pentecostals and became more devout than Jesus himself. Puralte laughed. Okay. We're not here to learn about your mom's lovers. Just tell me why they're called wildebeest stars. The wildebeest stars usually appeared in the sky in the southern hemisphere in the month of December, when wildebeest across the region birthed their young, all at the same time, as though they had colluded 8 months before in a spectacular orgy. Isn't that beautiful? I said. And to answer your question, Puralte, the one you haven't asked, but that I can see burning a hole through your provincial American mind. Nope, there are no wildebeest where I grew up in Bulawayo. Puralte laughed. I didn't grow up riding them, talking to them, picking ticks off their hides, or any of that Tarzan stuff. I only saw them when we went to the zoo for a school trip, and on safari with the Canadian guy Mama was seeing, and on National Geographic on TV. Wow, you know, Mom says when the three zebras appeared in the sky at this time of the year, the Taino knew the rainy season was coming to an end. Oh wow, you know, this is too cool. My Bantu astronomy and your Taino astronomy are having a young convo right now. When Shaniqua came stargazing with us on one of the evenings and heard us share star law, she pointed at the digging stars and called them Vagonejig, the hole in the sky. I could see how the digging stars formed some sort of portal. We marveled at this, at how each of our people had always made use of the stars and mourned the fact that we were only making this connection with one another now. Pa used to tell me how Sky Woman fell through Vanwejig and brought the first humans to Turtle Island, said Shaniqua. She came bearing gifts of tobacco, strawberries, sweet grass. Turtle Island, I said. What the Europeans named America, she said. After a while, she said, her voice quiet, that she wondered what kind of America an origin story born of the Sky Woman and not Manifest Destiny would have birthed. Thank you.
So I'm going to read the beginning of Who Fears Death, and let me just put that right there so you can see her face. And Who Fears Death is, so She Who Knows is a novella that is about the mother of the main character in Who Fears Death. Okay, it's just easier for me to read on a piece of paper. Chapter 1, The Face of My Father. My life fell apart when I was 16. Papa died. He had such a strong heart, yet he died. Was it the heat and the smoke from his blacksmithing shop? It's true that nothing could take him from his work, his art. He loved to make the metal bend and obey him, but his work only seemed to strengthen him. He was so happy in his shop. So what was it that killed him? To this day, I can't be sure. I hope it had nothing to do with me or what I did back then. Immediately after he died, my mother came running out of their bedroom, sobbing and throwing herself against the wall. I knew then that I would be different. I knew in that moment I would never again be able to control the fire inside me. I became a different creature that day, not so human. Everything that happened later, I now understand, started then. The ceremony was held outside, In the middle of the day, it was already terribly hot. His body lay on a thick white cloth surrounded by a garland of braided palm fronds. I knelt there in the sand before his body, saying my last goodbye. I'll never forget his face. It didn't look like Papa's anymore. Papa's skin was dark brown, his lips full. This face had sunken cheeks, deflated lips, and skin like gray-brown paper. Papa's spirit had gone elsewhere. The back of my neck prickled. My white veil was a poor protection from other people's ignorant and fearful eyes. By this time, everyone was always watching me. I clenched my jaw. Around me, women were on their knees weeping and wailing. Papa was dearly loved despite the fact that he'd married my mother, a woman with a daughter like me, an Ewu daughter. That had long been excused as one of those mistakes even the greatest man can make. Over the wailing, I heard my mother's soft whimper. She had suffered the greatest loss. It was her turn to take her last moment. Afterwards, they'd take him for cremation. I looked down at his face one last time. I wasn't ready. I blinked and touched my chest. That's when it happened, when I touched my chest. At first, it felt like an itchy tingle, and it quickly swelled into something more. The more I tried to get up, the more intense it got, and the more my grief expanded. They can't take him, I thought frantically. There's still so much metal left in his shop. He hasn't finished his work. The sensation spread through my chest and radiated out to the rest of my body. I rounded my shoulders to hold it in. Then I started pulling it from people around me. I shuddered and gnashed my teeth. I was filling with rage. Oh, not here, I thought, not at Papa's ceremony. Life wouldn't leave me alone long enough to even mourn my dead father. Behind me, the wailing stopped. All I heard was the gentle breeze. It was utterly eerie. Something was below my feet, in the ground or maybe somewhere else. Suddenly, I was slammed with the pained emotions from everyone around me for Papa. On instinct, I laid my hand on his arm. People started screaming. I didn't turn around. I was too focused on what I had to do. Nobody pulled me away. No one touched me. My friend Luyu's uncle was once struck by lightning during a rare dry season Ungwa storm. He survived, but he couldn't stop talking about how it felt like being violently shaken from inside out. That's how I felt now. I gasped with horror. I couldn't take my hand from Papa's arm. It was fused to him. My sand-colored skin tapered to his gray-brown skin from my palm, a mound of mingled flesh. I started screaming. It caught in my throat and I coughed. Then I stared. Papa's chest was slowly moving, up and down, up and down. He was breathing. I was both repulsed and desperately hopeful. I took a breath and cried, "Live, Papa, live." A pair of hands settled on my wrists. I knew exactly whose they were. One of his fingers was broken and bandaged, and if he didn't get his hands off me, I'd hurt him far worse than I had 5 days prior. "Onyesonwu," Aro said into my ear, quickly taking his hands from my wrists. Oh, how I hated him. But I listened. "He's gone," he said. "Let go so we can be free of it." Somehow, I did. I let go of Papa. Everything went dead silent again, as if the world for a moment were submerged in water. Then the power that had built up inside me burst. My veil was blown off my head. My freed braids whipped back. Everyone and everything was thrown back. Aro, my mother, family, friends, acquaintances, strangers, the table of food, the 50 yams, the 13 large monkey breadfruits, the 5 cows, the 10 goats, the 30 hens, and so much sand. Back in town, the power went off for 30 seconds. Houses would need to be swept of sand and computers would need to be taken in for dust damage. That underwater-like silence again. I looked down at my hand. When I tried to remove it from Papa's cold, still dead arm, there was a sound of peeling, like weak glue flaking off. My hand left a silhouette of dried mucus on Papa's arm. I rubbed my fingers together. More of the stuffs crackled and peeled from between them. I took one more look at Papa. Then I fell over and passed out. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, yes, your insights, giving us a sneak peek, but for some of them, maybe the books have been read already because of your prior stage performances. Nnedi, you mentioned at the beginning already that in your books, especially also in the current one, you center women, female women. Maybe you'd like to describe a little bit on how you shape your character, because they have an appearance of being very strong, very powerful in that sense, having different talents as well. So yes, maybe you could elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah. Whew. Every time I read that section, it's just...
Oh.
Well, I think that one of the things that was a really big foundational thing for me as a writer was when I was working on my master's degree at Michigan State University, and it was in journalism. And, you know, I love books, and I would always just go into the library just to look at the books. And just, it had nothing to do with what I was studying. I just loved it. I would just go in there and see what I could find and come out with a whole bunch of stuff. So one day I was in there, and I stumbled across the whole African literature section, whole wall full of African literature, and I was just like, and that first year, even though it had nothing to do with my degree, I read everything on that wall in a short period of time, and so because I read everything in a short period of time, especially certain authors, in particular Buchi, and I know my accent is going to mess up her name, it always does, but Buchi Emechida. I read all of her books all in a row, and she writes very closely about powerful, strong African female characters, in particular Nigerian, female characters navigating their way through patriarchy, you know, the structure of patriarchy. And because I read all of these together in a short period of time, I was able to see that, yes, in African literature, you had these dynamic characters, but what I noticed was that they never won, not often enough. The stories were very real, and they were deep and intense and pivotal and foundational, but they just didn't win enough, you know? And so for me, that inspired, I wanted to, a lot of the things that I write are because of what I want to read. You know, that's where it really starts. It starts with me as a reader. What do I want to read? And if I'm not seeing something, that's when I feel I have to write it so that I can read it. And so in this case, because I wanted to see these strong, dynamic African woman characters, and many who were like reflections of the women that I grew up with and that were all around me, I wanted to see them win more. I wanted to see them do these amazing things, and I wanted to see that ending. And so that's really where a lot of my characters, especially in the beginning, where a lot of my characters came from. Then I was writing these powerful, deeply African woman characters who were complex and flawed and had all of that, but I wanted to see them win. And so that's really where a lot of that comes from.
And when you said at the beginning that you didn't see women, African women in particularly, win enough in those stories, once you started writing, what was the feedback from the outside towards characters winning that are maybe the audience is not used to female black women winning in the stories? Was there some kind of feedback towards it or a reaction?
Yeah, I mean, it's always been a positive, refreshed reaction of, we want to see more of this. That's the strongest of it, is we want more. And I've been waiting for this type of character. So it's always been positive.
Great, thank you. Novuyo, so what I'd like to know, first of all, sciences, astronomy, indigenous and not. First of all, what's your personal relation to astronomy? And that's also maybe one of the things that we don't read a lot about. For me, it was very like, Oh, wow. It had really this wow character. Exactly the things, like sometimes you read things and then you just realize that I've never heard about this before, and it was important that I do because it widens the horizon about people and communities, also the way I see myself in terms of possibilities. And I'm sure despite the controversial reactions that you received, it is important to see new images. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit on it, which took you to take this brave step.
Wow, thank you. Great question. So I'm what you'd call a nerd, or so they say. Astronomy started off as a passion, but I did have a very personal question. It was the basic question: what are we? Who are we? And it had to do. I'll so move to you, the papa and the daughter. As fathers and daughters are my obsession, and Atando here is obsessed with the father. Zaman is obsessed with its father. Theme. I really was trying to answer the question: what are we? And this had to do with trying to figure out, my father had died when I was young, where is he? I was trying to ask that as a really serious question, because I was a sort of child who used to ask these questions. And I came from a Christian family, so the answer is always, he's a spirit. But in my head, I'm like, what is a spirit? Where is it? And in my teens, I would have these experiments, like, because I'm told the spirit can hear you, it's watching over you, so I'm like, what's my relationship? Is there an afterlife? And so I started with those questions. So astronomy became for me just our connection to everything, the stars. And suddenly, stargazing, the moon, the moon and I are connected. It just became, for me, the world became enchanted, right? I taught myself the science, I read the books, I visited observatories. It was a really deep passion. My partner who's here got annoyed, all my friends, because anyone who'd listen, it's like, you read, you want to test it, but the other people are bored. No one is really as interested as you are. So, I thought I could really actually put this in this novel I'm writing. For me, it would open up the world. I mistakenly thought science would give me the answers I was looking for, but a beautiful thing happened, which is that, for me, science gives us ever more precise metaphors. The metaphor's precise. Who are we? What are we? You never actually get to that answer, but for me, it just elevates us. And so that became really beautiful. So when I tried to write these characters, right, this is a Tandwa. I love Richard Powers' novels. But this girl is Ndebele, as an identity, like she cannot be a scientist in the way a white male can be a scientist. So in the act of writing, these problems crept up, right? Where identity comes into play. You actually cannot run away from identity and history. And so in my forays into science, I came across indigenous scientists in North America, exciting, and the work they were doing. But what happened, infusing indigeneity in the science, historicized Western science, which is meant to be universal. Suddenly, all the characters are historicized, including the white scientists, right? Suddenly, we had these sciences in conversation. Suddenly, this moved from being an immigrant novel to being a critique of colonialism. Because the moment you infuse indigeneity, especially into the America as a landscape, it just changes, for me, the game. So Atandwa is no longer interacting with America as we know it. It's also the America we, as immigrants, don't know, the indigenous America. So I became so obsessed or fascinated, but really frustrated in trying to research indigenous America. Like, where do you go? Mm-hmm. I tried to teach myself Hopi, the language, where I think 2 or 3 people have that language. I read critical accounts by authors, scholars, mostly white, but there's something missing there. So this was the journey. And so for me, the journey is reflected in the book, this journey of trying to uncover these histories. And so I will say one of the most profound things I came across when researching indigeneity was this history that we in Southern Africa, and this would be Kenya too, because we're settler colonies, have with the US, which is that we have Amarizeva. We grew up with my grandma, Amarizeva, our rural areas. See that name? Amarizeva, reserve in Canada, reservations in America. Right, it's connected. In 1910, this is me nerding out for 2 seconds. In 1910, the apartheid government went to Canada. North America studied the North American reservation. They loved it. They're like, this is excellent. Brought it back to South Africa, the Bantustans. The British South Africa Company, which had colonized us in next to Zimbabwe, loved this technology and brought it to us. And said, oh man, the UK parliamentary proceedings where they're talking about this, anyway, it's delicious. So this was like weird. I'm like, how come we don't even know this history? Why in Africa, we're talking about decolonization, do we have little interest in indigenous parts of the other world? Why do Africans go to a place like America and always say it's the white man's land, but we want our land back? It was just suddenly these questions. And this is just the beginning of a struggle to try and look at that. Yeah.
I am really fascinated in the way how you immerse yourself. Is one thing to gaze at the stars, and then in the way immerse yourself in that way and enriching yourself, learning so much about, literally, let me call it elsewhere. So on the panel before that I attended, one very smart, intelligent woman said Lola Shanine, she always wants, when people come to a festival, that they return home more smarter, more enlightened. And when I heard you just talking, I said, that's exactly why we come to festivals. So thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for taking us a little bit on the journey of how this book came into words and into printing. So, Okwiri, so you mentioned Miss Temperance, and when I read this part that one day, only one single day, she did not read her poem, people felt the need to throw a Molotov cocktail. From my diasporian Western upbringing, I thought that is quite extreme. So maybe you kind of elaborate a little bit on the importance of Miss Temperance to the town and the people in it.
So Miss Temperance, as I mentioned before, is the poet, and every day her poetry is broadcast on the radio, and everyone listens in. And the town itself has gone through a very traumatic event in the past, and they're trying to deal with it. And one of the ways that they deal with this trauma is through poetry, so it's some kind of therapy for them. But beyond it being therapy, it's a life force, but in the sense that it allows them the air to breathe, the oxygen, they can breathe in and feel like they're alive. But the counter side of that is that when oxygen is not there, you feel like you're choking, you feel like you're dying, and that's the sensation of death without poetry, without whatever poetry stands for, beauty, meaning, then there's nothing, there's only desolation, which is what the town feels. And Miss Temperance herself, when, as the novel unfolds, you discover that she is directly involved in part of the violence that was committed to her and her sister, and the line of women who, the generations of women, and the story is told from Ayosa's perspective. She's the 12-year-old girl, and she comes from a line of women who are very, carry so much pain, and they keep leaving because they cannot stand being there, being present, being still. And so the whole town is complicit in this, and the poetry, I guess, has this metaphorical life-giving force. And so when Ayosa is listening to this and she says, man, I feel like she writes it for me, I think it's also powerful because it's a way she gets to learn and to understand her own personal history and the city's own history, which is transmitted through the oral literature of the poetry.
Thank you. There is one aspect, in as much as we said that human conditions are illustrated, and there was one condition that I noticed in all of your individual books to a different extent, and that was lonesomeness, loneliness, and it was, I found it very intriguing, the different ways you depict it, and then I had that feeling as well. Novuyo, in your story, she also loses her father, and then basically the gazing in the stars starts, and it's a very interesting way, and how first of all the father lives in America, and then she comes to visit, but however she grapples with why my daddy is not living with me, and then she comes finally and sees, oh my God, he has a girlfriend, and that girlfriend has a son. And then in the way of an 11-year-old, she tries to grapple with it. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit how you actually manage it to make a really 11-year-old friendly, in the sense of, what is my father even saying with the stars? It doesn't even make sense when he kind of tells about his paper that he finally wrote.
I mean, the first part of the novel, when Atandwa is 11, was really fun to write. But you know, this is now like the older Atandwa looking back. So it's like, it's the mentality of the 24-year-old, but the emotion and the voice is the 11-year-old. So that was really nice to play around with, because then, you know, there are conversations here that the father's having with Candace at Atandwa. It goes over Atandwa's head, but hopefully the reader will get to, you know, Atandwa is very, you know, she's described as mean, but she's 11, you know. Peralte, the brother, she pinches him, you know, she's really in competition, she's trying to fight for her father's affection. But in terms of that emotional core, the loneliness you're talking about, if all three books have loneliness, this is a cliche one, it's just...
Mike.
I keep forgetting the mic. I wonder if, you know, as just writers, we are lonely people.
Maybe, yeah.
Well, maybe not in a bad way, but just lonely people in the sense of just alone with our thoughts, and then that emotion transmits onto the page. It's probably a cliche thing. But the loneliness, I think, works well in the stories, like here where it's the stars, and there's a certain silence and careful attention to detail or space that's needed for someone like Atandwa. She is socially awkward, maybe not so good with interactions, but I think she finds her footing when it comes to this attempt to communicate, to commune with the stars. Yeah.
Nnedi, in the story where Najiba gets her call, which is first of all very exciting, but then in the way as it progresses and she's about to go on the journey with her brother and her father, you start describing how the loneliness starts, because people don't accept, people find it strange that she as a woman does this. It's a mixture between envy. Maybe you could, elaborate a little bit on that one, and then you build it up with a kind of unknown, skills.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up loneliness and that loneliness as a theme. And it might be a writer's thing. You know, I wonder, because so much of writing is that you're just in that solitary space. So that might be part of it. But I do think that, like, in general, even with Najiba, and she gets this call, it's a long story. You know, it's not long, so actually it's pretty short. It's short. but yeah, it's all in there. But so she gets this call that girls and women have never had in her village. This is all explained. It sounds ridiculous when I'm just kind of summarizing this, but and this leads her on a journey of self, like a literal journey, and then also a metaphorical journey as well, and personal growth. And I think that just that theme of loneliness is definitely something that you find in all of my stories, especially more and more. But I think that it's also linked to a lot of my stories take place in deserts. And that's a personal thing. I love deserts. I love being in the desert. I live in the desert. So there's that, but also there's something about the desert. There's something mystical about deserts. They're vast, and even though it seems like it's a lonely place, even though it seems like it's a place where everything is dead, it's actually quite the contrary. If you look closely and if you spend time in desert regions, there's a lot of life happening, just in ways that you don't expect. So there's that. So this idea of loneliness, what exactly is loneliness, and is there a crowdedness in the loneliness? That's something I'm always playing with in my stories. Also, just this idea of the desert and being that, I don't know, that metaphor for being alone, but also being vast and open, and it's a place of, to me, I see it as a place of growth, personal growth, a place of spirituality, a place where, there's this exploration, a place of mystery, like all of those things are, and so if we take the idea of loneliness and then it's personified as the desert, you kind of get all the answers. Like there's something in that loneliness that's bigger than, there's a crowdedness in the loneliness, if that makes sense. I'm just gonna hold on to that.
Okwiri, also in your book, I mean, basically, come to think of it on the second thought, all the characters are sort of lonely. All the characters kind of, even when they come together, they somehow share their individual loneliness. As the reader, you feel like everybody is lonely and trying to navigate around this. So maybe you could explain, I mean, her mother is always not there. So
Right.
yeah, maybe you could elaborate a little bit on that.
So, at its core, it's a story about a protagonist who's a 12-year-old girl and her mother, who is always leaving and coming back and leaving. So she essentially brings herself up. And her mother's mother before her did the same thing, was leaving, coming back and leaving, and the mother's mother before that. So it's just a generation, a multi-generation of abandoned girls. And one time in a conversation with her mother says, lonely girls are a dime a dozen. What's your specific lonely feel like? And she says, it's quiet. And her mother wants to know, is it the one to, like the differentiate between quiet and quietude. Quietude is comforting, quiet is unsettling. And they talk about how her mother explains how when she was young and it was so quiet inside her head, it felt like something came and ate all the birds. So there's just this unsettling feeling that something is missing. And so this extends outside of these main characters to the rest of the town. And when I was writing this, I'm really drawn to the natural world, to nature. We have a lot of moments where there's just moments of quietude, if I may, where she's observing and she's in conversation with a bird and experiencing a love like she has never known before from a human, just by watching this bird and feeling such joy, but also such respect for this love. It's not the kind of love that you take away with you. It's the kind of love that you feel in the moment, and then you say goodbye and good luck. And so she has many such moments. She's looking for love. She's looking for connection, and she's very lonely. But she's a 12-year-old girl in her present body, and that's the thing to remember, is that her loneliness extends through space and time. It's a loneliness of her having been there and having experienced what it was like for the sun to shine over the first frost, or the mother woman giving birth to the first human, or I don't know, she has all these memories that feel also very lonely because she has not encountered anyone else to share such heavy burdens with. And one time she admits to her mother that she has these memories, and her mother says that is incredibly heavy. It would be heavy for anyone to carry such a thing. So there are many different kinds of burdens, many such lonesomenesses. And so part of the reason I struggled also to confine this novel within the bounds of magic realism is that I also feel it extends towards hyperrealism in the sense that it's very interested also in recording the mundane and the minutiae, like the atomic structures of just of life, staring at a blade of grass, like as though through a macro lens, and really seeing the surprising patterns you did not know. Nature is full of patterns, and just observing, oh, here is another one, and the textures and the smells and the way the light falls, the quality of light, the cadence, the assonance, the sound of things. And these are the things that I'm very interested in my writing. And so this hyperrealism, not in the sense of, when we're talking about hyperrealism in art, we're thinking of, like photographic, I don't know, like representations, but it's not in this way. It's just like very, very interested in recording the details. And part of this is, I don't know, like when I was writing this, also having this sense that you're also recording something that's on its way out. And I don't know, maybe it was this feeling of climate change and all of this. And I just wondered, 100 years from now, will we have the same landscape? Maybe it will just exist in the books that we're writing right now, and that on its own is a kind of lonesomeness, I felt.
I like the kind of ending thought about it, in the sense of, how will our world look like 100 years from now, or maybe 50 years from now, and then our books? Don't be so dramatic now. 2010, tomorrow. I would like to open up now this panel for questions from the audience. So feel free, this is your unique chance and that constellation to ask this brief and concise questions so that we can get as many as possible. Brief and concise, shock us. With the briefness and precise question. Shock us here in Germany. Yes, the Germans know what I'm talking about.
All right, I shall be brief and concise. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. I'm very curious about a line that I see coming through the three texts, which is the child narrator, the child voice. So I'd like all three of you perhaps, or if the chair or if the facilitator agrees, all three of you, perhaps only one of you, to just tell me what does the child voice bring to this connection with the ancestral, the extraordinary, plus the mundane, these connections that you're making. Is it about girlhood, and a specific sort of girlhood?
All right, if you all three want to answer this, then also you need to shock us with very short and precise questions. Answers. Yes.
Going to start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was suggesting you do, but for me, I can't be brief and precise, I'm sorry.
Try your best.
I'm very slow and methodical. So for me, the child narrator offered an opportunity to juxtapose innocence against the violence that's received and that continues to subsist. And through the child narrator as well, I had an opportunity to explore the surprising, like the conventions of, the confines of space and time and physicality, her body, and I could explore what it means to have these memories, what it means to access like ancestral or collective memory, collective pain, collective trauma, and juxtapose it against the innocence of a child. Why would a child have these memories? Why would a child have this knowledge that not many adults? What does it mean even? Would you call an adult who who is not 30 or 40 or 50, but rather centuries old, a mind, is that still an adult, or is it, what do you call that person? And that's what this child is. And so it's a very, it's an interesting duality, and having a child narrator offered me that opportunity.
Go ahead.
I felt my heart, like something in my heart when you said the child narrator. I was thinking, oh, it's the wounds, the wounds of childhood. Just very, because children feel, it's not, and Atando is not even, she's innocent, but she's also very mean, right? To Peralta, like she's mean in the way children are mean, in a very open way. Yeah, for me it's the wounds of childhood that we carry throughout our lives, that even at subconscious level we're not aware of. And I think in early part of this novel, Atando's desire for love, for her father's love and affection, is just so openly expressed, right? Even through her rejection of this new stepmother, whom she's really side-eyeing, because she's comparing this stepmother to her own mother. And then as she grows older, she starts having these psychosomatic episodes. It's like these emotional wounds start being expressed through the body, right? Through blackouts. And so it's really, so for me, I think that was my interest in this child narrator, exploring these emotional things that may be beyond language, but actually through metaphor, you can sort of dig into those things. Then of course, what's nice from an astronomical point of view, childlike, right? This enchantment that a child has is translated to this enchantment with the universe that's throughout. That even, adult scientists, adult and scientists, scientists are adults. That without enchantment, there can be no science. And then unenchanted science has led to the world we have today, right? This idea that the spiritual belongs to the primitives, and we are the sophisticated, it's a fallacy. Yeah, so, yeah.
It's a more difficult question for me to answer. I've written for children, I've written for young adults, I've written middle grade, and I've written adult. And I go where the story goes. So if the story is from a child's perspective, then that's where I go. I've been surprised many times by how sophisticated my younger characters can be in there, and also I've been surprised by like the how dynamic their points of views can be. So there's that. With She Who Knows is a novella that's part of a trilogy, and it's sort of a prequel sequel to Who Fears Death. It's about her mother. The main characters from Who Fears Death, it's about her mother, Najiba, and the first book, the first novella is Najiba as a child, and it's very much her story, and it's what 3 or 4 years between the ages of 13 and 16, 17. The second novella in the trilogy is when she's in her 40s. So it's like, that's why I can't, it's a trilogy, it's a prequel, sequel, I don't know, whatever. It is what it is. So I go where the story goes. And Najiba's character, so I've gotten to know this character very, very well. And her child point of view is very important to, of course, her foundational, who she is, and also the story as a whole, but so is her adult point. So I go where the story goes.
There is time for one more short and precise question.
I'm trying my best. Okay, sorry. I'm trying to do my best. First of all, thank you for the talk. I'm thinking about, maybe I'm just giving you some ideas and then you can make something out of it. I used to not really read fantasy or anything like this, and I started to read it like 5 years ago, and now I'm like obsessed, especially with like horror stories, but also science fiction and fantasy. And I was wondering, like, for me it has a lot of empowerment aspects, and I was just wondering what that, like, if you think about empowerment while writing, or how the idea of empowerment, like, fits into your writing.
In relation to fantasy, or just
In what way, like, fantasy and all of this has like a lot of possibility for empowerment?
Yeah, I mean, did you guys want to talk? I'll try to be brief. As I, when I first started really telling stories, after reading about, reading that whole wall of African literature, and it's a whole thing of how I came to writing science fiction and what's called fantasy. It's the whole thing. But so I read this wall of science of African literature, none of which was speculative at all. It's if we're talking about African literature and speculative fiction, there's crossover in this way that, and as you were pointing out, the limitations and problems of labels. So then I'm using a lot of labels as I'm talking, which I really shouldn't be doing, but it's the only way I can talk about these things. But after reading all of that, African literature, and then I'm thinking I wanted to see them win. I wanted to see these African women characters winning more, and the fact that I went on to write speculative fiction, when one of the things that I was looking for was seeing them win, I think there is something to that. I don't think that the only way to have women, have these characters win is in speculative fiction. But I do think there's a certain element, at least that I found as a writer, of empowering these characters through the speculative. That's not across the board, and that's not by definition, but for me, and I think some of it had to do with I came to writing speculative fiction through a need to explore African spiritual practices and traditions and cosmologies. That was a personal thing. That was a personal obsession for me, and it kind of came out like I felt like I had the freedom to explore those things in speculative fiction. These were things that whenever I would go to the village and ask about them, I'd get shut down very quickly. You're not supposed to talk about those things. Those things are either forbidden or whatever, thanks to colonialism. But I think that that was how I found my way to speculative fiction. And so that was already there. And so when I started writing these stories where I wanted to see these characters, these women empowered, and then this idea of the traditions and cosmologies and all of that was already there. That was already my obsession. I kind of brought those together, and that's what kind of led me to writing speculative fiction and finding that empowerment through speculative fiction.
Thank you for your question. Then maybe there's time for one more small short question.
She said no.
Do you feel like there's been a shift in how speculative fiction is viewed in the public? Because I feel like, especially in Germany, there's not a lot of appreciation for genre literature in regards to science fiction or fantasy or something. And I feel like, especially with you coming here, it looks like there might be a change, and I'd like to know if you've noticed that.
I think that there's definitely been a shift. I have 2 master's degrees and a PhD, and throughout all of that, that's a lot of schooling. So throughout all of that, I was taking creative writing classes. I started writing in the university, and the stories that I was writing were organically speculative. I didn't slap any labels on what I was doing. I just would write, and at first I was really writing memoir type stuff, and because of the way that I view the world, it came across as fantasy to people. So that was just me. But throughout all of my schooling, all of my professors, and these were professors that I loved and that I listened to and that I learned foundational things about writing from, all of them told me that science fiction and fantasy were not real literature. They would not let you write it in the class. Like they put, and actually when it comes to labels, they put on the syllabus that you could not, no science fiction or fantasy or mystery writing in this class. And so, and I knew I was writing post-apocalyptic stuff, you know? And I knew I wanted to workshop those in class. So what did I do? I just changed the label and called it magical realism. And it worked, it worked. But now, so that was just a few years, you know, that was some years ago. But now you can see that professors are teaching science fiction and speculative fiction in their classes. There is that respect is, there's still that snobbery, but there has definitely been a shift, because I can't even imagine having some of the classes that I see taught, and you know, my work is taught in universities as well, which is, yes. So yeah, there is a shift.
Thank you so much for being such a great audience, and thank you just for making Berlin, making the festival just shine with your presence, with your work. May the words, may the creativity just continue to be your constant guide, and may you write everything that you desire to write, and may it get this recognition. Thank you so much.